For this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do hatching and cross-hatching on a circle so that it looks like a sphere. So it's trying to use hatching and cross-hatching to follow the form to make sure it looks like a round ball instead of a flat circle. So the main way that we do this is to get your lines to curve to follow the curves of the shape that you're doing. So because we're using a circle, this will help you practice getting those curved lines and how to put those on there to get a nice transition. Now this is a copy of an original that I made, and in the original that I made, this was more of a transition here, but I'm going to show you how to do that. So for hatching, we know that from our value scale up here, all the lines are going to pretty much go running one direction. But because we're using this on a circular thing, our lines are going to have to curve to follow that curve. So for hatching, we're going to use lines that curve just like on a globe when you're thinking about longitude lines that go from pole to pole. So I'm going to start off using curved lines that mimic that curve of the edge. And as I move towards the center, the prime meridian there or whatever, I want it to go straight up and down. I'm still curving the lines out the closer I get to the edges, and it's going to be more straight up and down in the center. I'm drawing these lines pretty lightly so that it's going to give me a lighter value up at the top. I'm going to continue to add lines, but this time I'm going to start slightly shy of the pole. So I'm going to go in between the lines that I've already done, but I'm going to make them not quite going all the way to the edge. I'm going to continue to add lines. The type of lines that you add, you can reinforce this as you get darker and darker in your values. You can start to go one direction or the other direction. And as you do this, you see how it gets from dark, it fades to light, the line sort of tapers off. If you press down and kind of lift up as you make your mark, it sort of tapers that line by itself, and each line sort of starts to have that gradation from dark to light. So as you're going back and forth, I'm still curving my lines. I'm going to start to build up my value. So I'm trying to add more lines sort of on top of and in between what I've already done. And you can see here by the poles how it's pretty light, and then it starts to get this medium value right through here. So as I continue to build up my lines, I'm going to start to make them shorter and shorter in the middle. I'm working from the highlight, which is the lightest part on the object, to the intermediate shadow, which is slightly darker, goes from light gray into a dark gray, and then eventually into a core shadow, which is going to be right around and below the equator, if we think about this as a globe. The sort of shapes that you're doing are curved just like the beginning when we started, but I'm being a little bit more conscious of where I'm putting my lines. So now I'm going to make a smaller area right through the equator, right in the middle, that is really dark. And as I go out to the edges, I can expand that shadow a little bit longer, almost like starting out, and then gradually, as it goes out to the edges, I'm starting to make the lines a little longer. Okay, so it almost looks like an X-Wing fighter from Star Wars, or a bat, or something, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Right through the middle, right around the equator, I'm going to add more lines. I'm going to press slightly harder to get this to work into a highlight, an intermediate shadow right through here, and a core shadow right through here. You can see it kind of starts to look like the darker shadow creeps up the sides a little bit more. As you're finishing this, you want to have a transition from light to medium to dark. So what you don't want to have is like a big old bald spot at the top. You want to make sure that you're transitioning. So at this point, I can kind of go back and add a few lines in between just to make sure it doesn't have a line straight across. If you notice where these values are transitioning, it almost takes on a curved look right through here. And that's what you want it to look like. Down at the bottom, there is something called reflected light. That's where, if your light source is here and it's shining directly on your object, it's going to be the lightest part on the object, and then it gradually goes into a core shadow, which is pretty dark. But right here at the bottom edge, it's going to get a slightly lighter. It's not going to be as light as your highlight or your intermediate shadow, but slightly lighter right towards the bottom edge. And that comes from when the light hits the table past the object, it kind of travels in straight lines until it hits an object, and then the light bounces up. So light, kind of ambient light coming down and bouncing back up off the table, is going to hit the bottom of that shape and create a little bit of a reflection of light there. So it's not going to be super light, but right through the bottom, opposite the light source, you're going to have a slightly lighter area right through the bottom. That's the hatching. Cross hatching is going to be very similar. Again, we're going to start out just like the hatching, curving our lines to follow the form, adding our hatching lines in between. But now this time, if my light source is up here, right for the word form, if the word and is my light source basically, and I'm trying to do my lines to follow the form, I want to also create for cross hatching another set of lines that wraps around the ball this way. So I have these lines that go like longitude lines. These lines are going to be my latitude lines. So they're going to curve around. The common mistake that kids will make when they do these lines is that they'll kind of do this, where the lines curve maybe a little bit at the edges, but not really dip down in the middle. So what I like to do is start and make sure I'm angling them down on the side so they really do follow that curve. So really angle them down. And these lines are going to go just like the other ones. You put fewer and lighter close to the light source, and the further down you go, the more you can add. So they're making little crescent shapes, curving around that form, okay? Not straight across. It's going to look very different if you do this. This is almost like a flat-looking grate. So you don't want it to be like that. The only way we can make it look like a ball is to make it so that the lines curve in from the sides. Aim them down. So you can turn your paper if you want to turn it. And again, you want them more built up in the center. So I have a lot of lines that curve around my latitude. Now I'm going to add some more longitude lines. Following kind of the same rules as before, I want it to transition from light to medium into dark. So I can add lines in between, or partial lines, as long as they're following the same direction that I had before. I'm going to keep building up my values so I can get a nice core shadow, very dark, right around the equator. I can continue to pull some of those all the way down to the bottom. And this one, you just want to make sure your lines still curve, that you're curving them to follow that form, all right? You want it to also transition from light to medium to dark. So I have my medium, and I'm going to make my line shorter and closer together. I'm going to press harder. I'm going to try and get that core shadow right through the equator and below. Add some this way. So you still can see individual pencil lines. That's what cross-hatching is. If you start to shade it like this, it's not going to have the same effect. So in order for it to be cross-hatching, you want to still be able to see your individual pencil lines. If you're trying to shade a gradation, you won't want individual pencil lines, but for this, it's cross-hatching, and we do want to be able to see definite lines that go up and down and definite lines that go side to side. You'll know you're finished when you have a highlight, a lightest area, an intermediate shadow, and it goes seamlessly blends in. What you don't want to also have is like a bald spot where you have nothing up at the top here. So you don't want to have like an intermediate shadow and then a core shadow where there's a definite line in between. You don't want it to look like there's lines in between. So you don't want like nothing and then a definite edge in between your values. You want it to blend.